than what happens with 7 billion people. And 1% is not enough. 1% of the population means 70 million people. For 147 corporations, that means that each corporation has an average of 500,000 stakeholders. That is impossible. We are talking a much more minuscule situation, much more minuscule concentration of power, a much more minuscule oligarchical power whose only possibility of reproduction, or whose predominant possibility of reproduction came out of war, destabilization, and bubblization of the economy and the society. You can see here the most important corporations. Of course, you have here the main banks, the same banks that had created the crisis and received the golden bonuses, but also all the appreciation of the specialized risk and the people that controls the academia, etc., etc. But also, just take a look at the type of solutions that are working on behalf of the Western powers. The last, or the unique audit of the Federal Reserve has rendered these results. The report has shown that all the official figures were false. The real bailout only of one of the programs, the Covert Asset Relief Program, has given to a handful of banks $16 trillion. $16 trillion represents the income, the annual income of the accumulated annual income of 97% of the global population in the pockets of the same bankers that created the crisis. Could you imagine the effect of this additional $16 trillion? It's 110% of the United States GDP. Searching for additional opportunities of investment? So the remedy is worsening the conditions of the crisis. And most of these solutions, because they had not rendered productive credit, they had not rendered on increasing in the productive capabilities of the real economy, the only outcome of this type of resources is more globalization. That has distorted, structurally distorted the functioning of the international markets. There is no evolution, there is no roots in terms of the evolution of the cost of reproduction, in terms of the evolution of the most important relative prices at the international level. Which is the cost of reproduction of oil? $150 per barrel or $32 per barrel? Which is the cost of reproduction of food right now? Which is the equilibrium exchange rate between the dollar and the euro, the dollar and the yen and the yuan, the Argentinian peso and the Brazilian real? It is impossible to know. So all the information that was supposed to convey the system of prices today is totally misleading. The further decisions, the long-term decisions in terms of investment, in terms of specialization, in terms of comparative advantages, are totally misleading, are totally distorted, creating not only more overproduction, but also more anarchy in the market, more volatility, more destabilization, and more incentives for speculation. So we don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. What they are doing is worsening the situation, relying in their power to transfer the costs through different mechanisms, unequal exchange, unequal development that we in the left, among the progressive forces, have neglected to develop at the theoretical level and have neglected also to counterpose in operative terms at the national level and at the international level. And that is why they are winning the war. As Warren Buffett used to say, this is a class warfare. And you know what? We are winning, referring to the oligarchic classes. Okay, but the problem is that we are in the middle of they running out of ammunition. We don't have the time to go into the details, but this shows you the ineffectivity of the USA monetary policy since the middle of 2005 and the disintegration of the credit system in the United States. Joe Stiglitz for sure was looking at this chart when he named his last book Free Fall. This is the rate of growth of credit in the United States. Look, this is the injection of liquidity, M1 in the United States, TARP, and that is the response in terms of credit. This is quantitative easing 2, M1, with Obama. And that is the insignificant result in terms of credit. And that is quantitative easing 2, and you know nothing in terms of response, of the credit response in the financial system in the United States. And even in terms of negative rates of growth. You have a mild recovery during the last, during some months, that again was turned over with the European worsening of the crisis, but everything in the realm of negative rates of growth. Okay. In the middle also of an international and spontaneous decomposition of the main sources of international demand for the dollar that sustain the hegemonic power of dollar in the international liquidity system. For example, here the change in the portfolio of the of Russian international reserves that has been the same for China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Latin America with different degrees of assertiveness. But also everything in the middle of a structural and very difficult and with a very difficult conditions of reversibility of the transfer of the industrial power towards the so-called emerging economies. This is key. In several other historical episodes, the core of the industrial power has been at the middle, in the center of the bloody dispute for international hegemony. Right now, the possibility of the international logistics of the reproduction of these powers are at the core of the map, at the geostrategic map of conflicts in the immediate future. What is happening in Africa is a very clear evidence of that situation. And Latin America is facing an immediate challenge in the same realm, maybe with different mechanisms, but that is the core of geopolitics today. I'd like to jump from this slide. And everything in the middle of a global, a transnationalization of the financial system. So no country, not even China, is an exception in terms of this pollution, in this mechanism, these inner mechanisms of reproduction of the speculative sector. All the official figures about the robustness of the financial system are totally flawed. Not only because of the very clear evidences of accountancy fraud, but also because structurally all the financial derivatives are out of balance. That means they are not part of the accountancy of every bank. JP Morgan Chase had $93 trillion, 160-something% of the global GDP in derivatives, and they do not appear in the assets and liabilities of the bank. Bank of America has $75 trillion in derivatives, and they do not appear in the balance sheet of the bank. The stress tests that every time appear in the considerations of the rating agencies do not play any role because everything is made up. Most of the financial assets in the big corporations are based not upon the mark-to-market value of those assets, on the derivations of those assets, but in mark-to-model, the self-selected model of the enterprise, of the corporation to value those assets. We are in the middle of a structural, gigantical insolvency problem. And that has affected the same principle of private property. It has not been the communists, not the anarchists, not the Talibans that have destroyed private property. It has been the financial capital. That is the profundity of the crisis. And facing this, we need to create an immediate solution, because we are in the middle. Even with a very imperfect indicator of GDP, we are in the middle of another plunging of the economy. We are in the middle of a synchronization, a programmed new recession, both in the center, but also with pressures among the saviors of the world in the previous episode of recession, the emerging economies. So we need to create conditions that could break up this international monopoly of the dollar, the core of one of the pillars of the strength of the financial oligarchy, the other one being the military, and in order to create a real incidence in this dispute for global hegemony, creating the conditions that could stop the configuration of this neo-oligarchical type of dominion. Well, I'm going to leave you this material for you to discuss during the break lunch. And what is important now is that we need to create a counteroffensive, an immediate counteroffensive at the global level, because the agenda of the oligarchical minority is a colossal expropriation of self-determination. A colossal expropriation of the will of the individual, of the collectivity, of the nation state, of the continent. Our response is empowerment, power to the people. Is to build sovereignty at the local level, sovereignty at the subnational level, at the popular level, at the national level, at the supranational level, in order to build up a multipolar world, a much more democratic system in which what every one of us do matters. And an important part of this is referred to the financial and economic conditions, the possibility of deployment, the initiative of the people. This is not the system of the private initiative. This is the system that deprives us of the initiative, because billions of productive projects have been blocked because they do not fulfill the requirements of financial capital in terms of rate of profit, in terms of the calendar and the chronogram of the cash flow results, in terms of the needs, in what is called in the lexicon of the economists, in terms of the efficiency of the market. We need to create room for other type of logics of production, other type of logics of social organization. And that opens the door for all type of schools of thought. Remember Mao, we need to create the conditions for the blossoming of all the possibilities of creativity of the people. This is a collective creation, and an important part of that situation passed through the changing in the conditions between finance and production, a new type of articulation between private capital, the economy of the state, and the heterogeneous realm of the popular economy, and for the renegotiation of the international division of labor. We have an urgent planetary agenda to build together. We need to create an alternative in terms of the construction of sovereign system of credits instead of the immediate deployment of this global system of debt slavery. And what in Latin America where we were attempting was the response of the new regional financial architecture with Banco del Sur, the alternative to the International Monetary Fund, and the regional currency as mechanisms to reconstruct sovereignty, economic sovereignty. We thought that we can build up block regional arrangements right now, not to expect, not to wait for the triumph of the revolution to start the changes, but to start the changes right now with the current correlation of forces, including the bourgeoisie, including important fractions of capital, local and international capital, in order to block this perpetual war that is in the agenda of the imperialist oligarchy. Thank you very much.